Можемо починати.
Сейчас. Угу. Чутно? Все. Yeah. Добре. So, good morning, everyone, and welcome. Across recovery context globally, we often focus on financing, infrastructure, and policy frameworks. But is the more fundamental question: who will actually deliver recovery on the ground? Today's discussion focuses on workforce capacity, not just a social issue, but as a core constraint to implementation, productivity, and investment absorption. We will explore where skills gaps are most critical, how they affect recovery delivery, and what governments, business, civil society, and international partners can do differently. Let me now invite our opening speakers. I think Irina, maybe you can start this discussion, and I have two questions for you. You work directly with communities and local governments on recovery planning and implementation. So, from your experience, where do you see the biggest gaps between available talent and skills actually recovered to deliver recovery projects?
Thank you very much, Olga. Good morning, everybody. My name is Irina Mikulic, and I'm representing Agency for Recovery and Development. It's an NGO from Ukraine, and our main goal to work with communities to help them through the recovery process to go through smoothly, effectively, and inclusively, which is very important. We can talk about these shortages in capacity like globally. Ukraine is not the only place, where it's happening. It's happening in every place where the war took place. Like in the case of Ukraine, I can explain and show explain our situation. After the war has started, lots of people has fled the country, of course, because at some point it was impossible to live at some places. Also, many men have been mobilized to the front lines, and it also decreased the amount of human resources that we had on the municipal level. And this is a huge problem right now. The huge gap is created, especially at the local level, because that's where recovery is actually happening. On the national level, you can do the planning, you can strategize, but the actual recovery, the recovery project, they are happening on the local level, in the communities. And in the communities right now in Ukraine, we have a huge capacity gap, because there is basically very limited amount of people left who are able actually to deliver recovery. So right now we have a huge problem with the people who can actually plan the project, who can work with international partners, who actually know, basic English, let's be honest, it's like in addition to all the technical knowledge, people need to know English to communicate with international partners, to work on international arena, to lure the investment to the community, and to be able actually to implement together with the partners those recovery projects. So as a civil society who works on the ground for a very long time, we're working with them directly, and we see the tools and options that we have actually that can help, this situation. And I believe that these approaches can help not only Ukraine, but also be very useful to other countries in other regions where the conflict and war is taking place. Though the first thing that I would like to mention is civil society. Civil society is actually a great source of the human resources and the knowledge. And our recommendation is for the municipalities, for the national governments to work with the civil society as much as possible, because it's also a resource, like knowledgeable resource, and also that resource that can work with the communities on the ground, like not only as like teaching, but also like as a co-implementer of the recovery projects. Also reskilling. In Ukraine, the situation is that we have many people without jobs from different professions. But at the same time, we have a lot of available positions, for example, as a project managers, right? Right. So if we had a reskilling program that would, for example, take those people who have already their knowledge, from other fields and teach them about the project management, for example, we could use their expertise like to the project management, because project management, like they can work on different projects, it's a different thematics, and they can be very useful. They can find their job. Basically, the municipality can close the gap, of the specialists that they are lacking. And in this case, these programs can actually play a huge role, not only about like fighting unemployment, but also solving the problem with the shortages of the human resources. And the third and very important, I guess, the solution that I would say, it's not using, but inviting people from the diaspora from around the world. Because as I said at the beginning, lots of people have left, but like many people before the war has left already, and they have settled down in other countries. They have developed their expertise, they have developed their connections. And if we create the programs, and ways to engage them for the recovery projects, in the communities on the national level, I think it will be a great solution to this problem, not only to increase the human resources on the ground, but also how to lure Ukrainians back, for example, because I believe every country, who lost their citizen are interested in getting these people back, right? But it's really, really hard to do. But in this way, if you can think of the flexible program that can engage the people from diaspora, maybe partially, maybe even 100%, but still, if you do have this program in place, I think it can be a great solution to this problem. I guess I will stop here and I'll give the chance for other speakers to talk about this. And if you have any other questions to me, I would love to answer them.
Oh.
Yes.
Have my microphone?
Yeah, I can hear pretty well. Yes, no worries. Yes, that's right.
I appreciate what you said.
Thank you.
I don't want to be nasty, but how can they come back if the war is still on?
It's a very good question. Many people in Ukraine still living there, despite the war. And that's why the recovery has already happening. Because we want to keep people in the communities. We are building shelters, we are renewing hospitals, we are renewing schools, we're building possibilities for the people. Yes, it's not easy. That's why I'm talking, if we want people to come back, it can be different ways of coming back. It can be partial, it can be remote, but we still can use their knowledge and expertise. Even, for example, if the person thinks that it's too dangerous for them to travel at some parts of Ukraine, for example, right? They can participate online. They can participate in different cities. They can find the way to communicate. It's not particularly they need to physically move to the front lines. But I believe if we think about this, we will definitely find the right solution to different, because every country, every situation is different. But if we think about the people from outside, from diaspora, as a great help to us, we can find the suitable way to engage them.
How many people do you have outside the country?
Honestly, I don't know exact number of how many people we do have outside, but I know that we already have connected more than hundreds of people in diaspora. And I can actually tell you about one project that we did last year in Italy. We were reaching out to the Congress of Ukrainian organizations in Italy, who helped us actually made the partnerships between Italian communities and Ukrainian communities. And currently these projects, actually the communities are cooperating and making common projects, which will benefiting actually Italian citizens of those communities and Ukrainian citizens of those communities. And Ukrainian descendants, Ukrainian diaspora was very helpful in reaching out, for example, to the mayors of those communities in Italy and making actually these partnerships possible. You see? Maybe you can help us more.
Thank you,
If I
Irina.
could just let's use the mic for the live stream for the questions so the live stream can hear the question.
Thank you. Thank you, Irina. And thank you, Alexandra. Maybe you can introduce yourself. And I have two questions for you. Introduce and then I question.
Alexandra Bitley, I'm leading research fellow in a Ukrainian think tank, which is name is Institute for Economic Research and Policy Consulting, and we do economic analysis on the broad number of fields, and we work also on European integration issues.
My first question from a labor market perspective, what are the key structural drivers behind skill shortages and recovery context, including Ukraine? And second question, we often see disconnect between education system, labor markets, and real economic damage. What policy challenges are needed to better align skills development with actual recovery and investment needed?
Thank you so much for the chance to speak here. First, I would like to refer what Olga said at the beginning. When we talk about recovery, usually we speak about money. I mean, like how much money we need. And for example, for Ukraine, World Bank, together with our government, estimated that rapid damage and needs assessment for Ukraine, it's already close to $600 billion. And this is kind of enormous amount. And but what is important here is that this big amount should come not from official partners, but from private business. And that's what we hope for. But private business will come when we have labor. And this labor has good skills. And we have good structure of labor and in places where actually business can operate and they do operate. As Irina already mentioned, recovery is already going on. Why it is so? Just because like when we have a full-scale invasion and actually drones and missiles, unfortunately, are flying all over Ukraine, even to the western border, and sometimes they come even to Poland. People still live in Ukraine, and some people do return to Ukraine because they see some chances in Ukraine that they don't have, for example, in European countries as refugees. And what is important here is that we provide these people with the chance to live. So I mean, like it's kind of we have access, they have access, for example, to healthcare, education, to jobs, etc. And this is important. That's why actual recovery is going on. So some of the premises of educational facilities, healthcare facilities, which were damaged by Russian drones and the missiles, they were restored, they were financed at the expense of the loans from our international partners, for example, European Investment Bank. But again, I would like to just say that this money usually comes as loans. So in the future, we will have to repay them. And that's where we return again to private business. Because we really need private business to come to Ukraine to create jobs, to create nice, good jobs, actually. And as a result, people will stay in Ukraine and will have the chance to work there. So, but the problem is skills. And this is not a unique problem for Ukraine. This problem is for many emerging markets. So labor is there is high unemployment rate, but still employers do face the problems to find good people because there is a skills mismatch. This says us again and again that actually the bottleneck on the labor market and about the recovery is not actually the number of people that we have in the country, but the structure of these people, what knowledge they have. And actually, that's why we are saying that in order to solve the problem at the labor market, we have to solve problem in the business environment, we have to solve problems in education. And what is becoming more important for all our countries is education for adults. Because usually we do have secondary schools, we do have kind of some universities. In some countries, there is better access to universities, and some is really bad. But at the same time, what is really needed in our dynamic world is education for adults. And this is something that, for example, Ukraine, and I know that many emerging markets also are just trying to build. This is new kind of type of education. It's again about vocational education training. But at the same time, it's something different because we need to talk about adults. We have to train them to what labor market is really needed and what enterprises need. Because people, businesses will come to places better if they see not only good environment, business environment, but also that people are there, they can actually work, and they are productive. Because when we talk again about recovery and we talk about economic growth, we just have to remember this formula for economic growth, yeah? That economic growth really depends on capital, so it's investments. It depends on labor, this is headcount, but then it's also productivity. And productivity, these are skills when we talk about in relation to labor. It's not only productivity, what kind of equipment the company uses. But actually, if we do invest, and that's kind of what I saw also, and World Bank sometimes refers to this, so the companies sometimes are eager to invest in better technologies to be more productive, but if they don't have good labor at the place, then I mean, like, why to invest? Because there will be nobody to work there. And that's why where there will be a huge difference, I think, in the nearest future. It's about Ukraine, but also other countries, is that business should become not only the user of labor, but the creator of skills. And this is something that I think not all business is ready for, even though many businesses already are doing on-job training, etc. But this is something that businesses will also have to create the programs. They will have to do more, not only on-job trainings, but actually go to schools even, go to universities for young people and formulate the curricula and formulate clearly what kind of demand they have for the skills in the future. And this is something that what, for example, in Ukraine we are challenged for, is that sometimes our businesses do not have strong strategies even for 5 or 10 years. And we understand that education system, it's like real long-term perspective, and we really need our education system to be informed by actually businesses what kind of labor they need, what kind of skills they will need, what kind of curricula, therefore, we have to do. But again, this is only one part. This is for young people, but this is important because we know that many countries have really high unemployment for young people. And this is just because there is this disconnect between education system and labor market. That's because actual businesses sometimes do not inform enough, or actual educational facilities or our governments or local communities, they don't listen sometimes because we know better. And this is a kind of a struggle that we face, I think, in many countries, is also what should be the prior issue, whether the government should actually say what kind of sectors we want to develop, and do not listen to business, I mean, like what the business wants, or we have to actually give opportunity to business, say, guys, we want to develop this or another sector, and therefore we need this or another set of skills. And this is something that this is kind of a broader discussion, but again, recovery and growth will not be possible without this discussion and without this kind of really good cooperation between the government, business, people, educational facilities. And that's what makes this area really interesting but really challenging, just because I mean, like, it's really that we have to focus that all of us have different priorities sometimes. All of us have different goals. And therefore, to make this kind of choice correctly, to see, I mean, like, how it should work, it's kind of also a new skill that actually all of us need, like all stakeholders of the process, because previously we didn't have such challenges because we didn't have such a dynamic world. Currently, we are talking about artificial intelligence. This creates another chances for some people, but those people who are disconnected from, for example, computers, they are disconnected already from anything from AI. They are losing the competition on the labor market already now. And then when we talk about the future, these people will be deprived of the right for good job, and as a result, they will be deprived of the right for actually chances to grow and actually provide good education to their children as well. In Ukraine, we do have a shortage of labor in critical for recovery sectors. Last year, we have done the research on construction sector. Again, just taking into account that, I mean, like, everybody talks about financing, but if you don't have right people at the place, then there is a problem. And in Ukraine, indeed, we have problem with constructors, we have problem with designers, with architects, and that's where we usually saying that for Ukraine especially, I mean, like, I know that it's not applicable to for all countries, but for us, European integration is something which provides us kind of a better possibility for better future. And it's not, but there is something to be learned from European integration, even for countries who are not becoming members of European integration. And one of these aspects is that European acquis, like legislation, foresees recognition of informally received skills as a core for labor market at the moment. And this is something which is really important, especially for people who have access to computer, who has access to internet. We have kind of so many online courses. Or sometimes people like migrants, etc. I mean, like they can return to the country with the different skills than they had when they will leave in country. And therefore, we really have to build the system, and we already building it on recognition of informally received skills. And this is something also that should be recognized, and I think this can be applicable for any country, actually, that people just have to prove that they, for example, worked as a constructors in some of the countries, or they actually learned some languages, or they learned some kind of soft skills, or they became project managers, etc. And you just have to create centers, like qualification centers, that do check the knowledge. They do just see whether you're qualified enough, and actually you receive certificate, and as a result, you can apply for the job that you wouldn't apply before because you don't have formal education in the area. And this is also something that I think that everybody can benefit from in all countries, just provide these opportunities for people just to show that they are smart enough, for example, they receive the knowledge or skills in some informal way, not in education because of lack of access to education. And this is something that we really need to do. One more point about Ukraine is also that what we will be challenged for, and I know that some emerging countries and in Africa, etc. I mean, like they will have, I mean, like low-income countries have the same problem. It's when children do not have really good access to education. For Ukraine, we didn't have this problem, I mean, like before. Currently, we do because of the war. Many thousands, like close to 1 million of Ukrainian children study only online, sometimes with bad access to education as well, I mean, like even online, just because there are so many alerts all the time, and people, and not all schools have bomb shelters. And currently in Ukraine, school can operate offline only if there is a bomb shelter there. And this relates to all over Ukraine. And as a result, what happens in Ukraine is that the government is financing, and we are building underground schools. So it's underground schools are built in Kharkiv, they are built in Zaporizhia, in other regions, and this is something which terrifies. And why online education is bad sometimes, it's just children do not receive soft skills. And here I would like just to mention that soft skills, and we have to remember this, are really important for the future labor market. When we do read all analysis about labor markets of the future, about everything, soft skills is the core. And one of the skills, I still refer this as a soft skill, is the possibility to learn fast and to transfer fast. And that's what our children sometimes are lacking now. And this is something that we are talking with sometimes with our international partners, that we shouldn't talk only about educational gap. So it's a gap in knowledge, because actually, I mean, like you can still learn math or physics. It will be more difficult, or language. But if you don't have soft skills, then it's really much harder, I mean, like to learn this and to have the skills. And therefore, it's also, I mean, like that we have to just remember that we shouldn't talk only about hard skills, about hard knowledge, but we should talk about soft skills and how to develop them and what to do in the future. And therefore, I just want to finish with again the statement that financing for recovery in any country, in any context, is important. But what is also important is what type of labor we have, whether we can work thoroughly and together with educational capacity establishments, local governments, businesses, and just to cooperate to find the way forward, which will actually benefit most of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alexandra. Maybe a question? Yes, of course.
I was wondering, can you also introduce yourself for the audience online? Yeah, so I'm Elizabeth McBride. I'm a short-term consultant working with a digital team on a cybersecurity practitioner's note for Africa. I was wondering, what are the indications, or how do you measure that a skills gap actually exists? How do you prove to the international partners that it's there in a particular area?
So actually, I mean, like when we talk about skills mismatch, then I mean, like there are different, really various methods how to do this. But actually, the biggest one, the most kind of the simplest one, is that when we do see high unemployment rate, but at the same time, employers say that they find it difficult to find labor, especially qualified labor, And this is kind of the easiest one. Even though there are really different methods, because I was involved in one of the projects where we were trying to match this. So, but for that one, we will really need more data. And therefore, for many countries, we don't have enough data. And therefore, this is the easiest one. Therefore, it's survey of business, which actually responds to you. And also what I wanted just to say, sometimes it's skills mismatch, but sometimes what is important that I think that it's not only for Ukraine, it's regional mismatch as well. So sometimes labor is in the places where employers do not want to work, but employees are somewhere else. And therefore, for this kind of mismatch, but it's not about skills, there is a need for government programs just to relocate these people and to match them regionally.
And are there examples of good business surveys that are out there, people who are really good at eliciting that kind of data from businesses?
In Ukraine, we do have it, okay. But I thought World Bank actually has it for every country, I think, and therefore previously we were using World Bank, but currently we have our own. But actually World Bank does it and probably you will say about this, yes, they do have the survey about this. Mm-hmm. And also, ILO sometimes does reports on this as well.
Also would like to add, despite the fact that maybe we do not have on national level the statistics on this, the civil society works with the communities, and when we plan, for example, the strategic documents for the municipalities, we also do the questionnaires, and these questionnaires also include questions, on to determine, what is the gap, how many people they are lacking, and how many people are unemployed in this particular community. And we are using actually this data to communicate with donors and to advocate, to get more programs and scale up those programs.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Laura. I work at IREX. Maybe you're familiar with our work. We've been in Ukraine for many years now. And I had a question about something that, Alexandra, you said about the examples of these difficulties between private sector and universities or education sector to understand each other and to really co-create a program that can. So I wonder, if you had examples of good practices that you are looking at, maybe through the World Bank, I don't know, but that you are, that you have in mind and that you would like to see in Ukraine. Thank you.
If you talk about, for example, university and the technical education, then we had the Polytechnic University in Ukraine, which really started working with business, and they co-created scientific projects, and they tested some of the hypotheses in businesses, but it was just done some years before full-scale invasion. Currently, it is on hold. But this was kind of really good example of higher education. Sometimes we do have for vet schools. It's really kind of for in agriculture, for example, but it really depends on business. What is changed has changed. What we don't have in Ukraine still, and this is something that ILO, for example, and World Bank are saying that it's important. It's apprenticeship system. It's for example, many European countries have. We don't have this yet. It started developing just now, because our companies do have really shortage of labor. Sometimes, especially when we talk about agriculture, it's even drivers for combiners, etc., because many men are in army now, and therefore they're fighting for our protection. Unfortunately, many were killed already in the war. And therefore, now business is ready to actually hire young people, even students of vet education system. Previously, they were not really eager to do this, because they were oh guys, my combine costs 1 million. I don't allow you children, to go there to break something. So currently it changes, but unfortunately it changes under such circumstances when they actually don't have any choice. And this is something also about women participation. Currently more women are starting working on what was believed before men's jobs. Just again, because previously businesses were not happy to hire women, for example, as drivers for heavy machines or something like that, or truck drivers. Currently, they do just because they are in such a situation. And that's why actually shelters in schools and kindergartens become really important for labor participation of women. Because otherwise, if young children are staying at home, studying online, or just without any education, then women should stay at home. And therefore, these investments in shelters now is something to improve access to education for children, but at the same time to increase labor participation of women. But here again, I mean, like we really need this kind of education for adults, just because women were not ready, I mean, like to take some of the jobs that are there now. Currently, for example, women are those who are installing solar panels, which are really important for Ukraine, where Russia destroyed big part of traditional energy generation, and therefore renewables are really important. And this is something that women started doing, because previously women were not there in that sector at all.
Thank you, Alexandra. Now I would like to turn to Mikhail, who is joining us online. He brings a valuable perspective from the Western Balkans. Mikhail, thank you for joining us online. What are the main reasons for labor shortages, and what policies works best to keep or attract workers? Do you hear us?
Yes, yes, I hear you. I hope you hear me, and thank you for having me. And just as a sort of background, I teach labor economics at Belgrade University, and was basically asked to provide, experience of Western Balkan countries in their post-conflict journey from high unemployment and excess labor supply to labor shortages that they all experience now. And I would briefly say that, the main reason for this journey from high unemployment and excess labor to labor shortages has been, of course, a lot of objective reasons, but it was facilitated by the disregard for the people and workers as a part of sort of general policy making at that time, which I consider myopic and a sort of a mistake that needs to be avoided in the sort of newer examples, including, of course, that of Ukraine. But it is important to mention that context, because the region of the Western Balkans was, as you remember, the major conflicts were during the 90s, and then they extended a little bit into 2000. And at that time, this coincided with the transition to market economy, privatization, which brought a sort of autonomous hardship. And this prompted, in a way, policymakers to treat labor as a sort of as being in unlimited supply, and actually somehow they felt relief with signs of demographic decline or high immigration. And the economic laws were sort of really, in terms of on what happened with migration, were really, worked as expected. Countries that experienced a lot of conflict, the most severe conflicts and the most prolonged, had the highest immigration rate, and had to this day, like Bosnia and Herzegovina. But then also countries that were poor, like Albania and Kosovo, poorer than others, also had a more immigration than others. And on the other hand, those countries that somehow did not have such pronounced immigration, like Serbia and Montenegro, they were the first to, and they also had the highest wages. And basically, this is it. The wage differentials really matter, and countries which, in the meantime, managed to somehow increase their wages enough for wage differentials to become moderate in comparison with the major immigration countries, where they first saw the sort of the reduction in net outflows. Of course, migration balance is still negative, but still it is somehow eventually being reduced. And of course, the Western Balkans is in the neighborhood of the most sort of advanced and rich part of the world, European Union, with excellent welfare policies, almost unlimited demand for labor, especially when it comes to country like Germany. So there are many factors that are still sort of bringing people from the Western Balkans into European Union and create further shortages. And actually, the first labor shortages emerged as occupational shortages, meaning that those occupations that are in the highest demand in the European Union, like industrial workers, drivers, construction workers, and so on, they were first in, short supply in the region. And this gradually actually brought the combination of market forces on the one hand, the sort of drying out of workers in the region, and on the other hand, the realization that for the growth to be sustainable, you need the sort of well-motivated labor force, brought the gradual change in labor market policy. So instead of basically being almost hostile toward labor, and also there were legacy of socialist labor relations and so on. So the most important thing was bringing in capital and, keep labor peaceful in a way. So that was the beginning of transition. And then in the meantime, on the one hand, the functioning of market forces, the lack of labor, in some instances, the FDI inflow, which actually was quite successful in some countries, for example, in Serbia. So it was done initially because of the pro-business regulation or, flexible labor, among other things, of course, flexible labor legislation and so on. But then on the other hand, its success brought another type of shortages of labor, and in turn, it brought higher wages. And then at some point, the government supported that. And by the end of the last decade, we had an increase in minimum wages throughout, actually, the three countries in the region: Serbia, Montenegro, perhaps most pronounced, and North Macedonia. And it was like in the textbook that we teach, the famous New Jersey, Pennsylvania, case. The increase in minimum wages in all three countries brought about higher employment, higher activity rate, and brought down unemployment. And as a side effect, because of higher wages, higher general wages driven by increase in minimum wages, this brought also less immigration, and at least slightly diminished labor shortages. So this is something that also shows that sort of the idea that wage increases, increase in labor costs about productivity and so on. This is really something that should be carefully monitored. But I think, for example, there is the macroeconomic indicator called labor share, or as opposed to capital share, as you know. And so if the labor share in all these countries is still far or moderately below its levels in the EU. So there is still some space to increase the labor share, ideally through the increase in employment, but also perhaps through the combination of employment, increase in employment and wages. And what is also interesting is that, increase in euro wages is important when we speak about labor knowledge, euro or dollar wages or whatever, but because today's today's migrations are mostly migrations of workers rather than of people moving permanently. And because of that, those temporary labor migrants are less tempted to emigrate if the wage differentials are small. And this is what is happening. We had a stage in which people from workers from Western Balkans emigrated to Eastern Europe for 50% wage differentials. Now they are even less, and they almost stopped emigrating there. Of course, Western Europe is still quite important. So that's one example of what I think is important. The work should pay, then also take care about labor taxes, try to reduce them. Montenegro was very successful in that, for example. What else could be done? Again, I'm speaking about macro policies, not so much structural policies. But when it comes, for example, to sectoral policies, Serbia, not all countries actually experience great growth. Fortunately, the EU requires more, for the brain drain not to happen, the EU imports mostly sort of medium-skilled labor from this region. And because of that, actually, that's why it is important to take care about the median worker and not so much about, only those talented who anyway would emigrate in a larger proportion. But one sector should somehow be supported, and that sectoral policy was really successful in Serbia. This is the IT sector. And the IT sector was supported in various ways, from tax reliefs to, basically industrial policy aimed at this sector, and companies employ that, to special treatment of those freelancers or telemigrants, who are in the region, who remain in the region but work for foreign companies, and, provide various sort of positive externalities by being resident in the region and being part of local IT hubs and communities. And then, of course, as gradually the labor shortages are stronger and stronger, the policies of bringing in foreign labor are becoming more important. And some countries still retain quotas, which is something that should be somehow abandoned. And others are creating some basically fast-track initiatives for workers, for immigrant workers with occupations that are declared, found out to be officially in shortage. And for example, again, Serbia is the most advanced in this area because it experienced the most labor shortages. But all countries are moving in the same direction, perhaps with a different speed. But as I say, the 30-year experience, and I will end here, shows that we should not be myopic, that the labor eventually, and also because of secular demographic terms, will be more rare and more precious than any other production path. Thank you.
Thank you, Mikhail, for your opinion. And let's now connect this discussion to financing and implementation. And I would like to turn to Judy Young from the World Bank. How do works problems affect the use of funding, and what can international institutes do better?
Thank you. So my name is Judy. I work with the poverty sector at the World Bank. So I'm a senior economist. And in Ukraine, our program, we run the Listening to Ukraine survey. So a lot of the discussion here has been about how we don't know how many people are there. We don't know the situation on the ground. So we've been running phone surveys since 2023. Official statistics has been paused, right? There's no official statistics since then, so we've been running phone surveys. So we do poverty simulations, we're measuring inequality, we're looking at the labor market, we're checking well-being. We also ask about perceptions, and we also have a project with state statistics that will help reestablish surveys in Ukraine. So that's my background for Ukraine. So the question from the World Bank perspective, how do the workforce constraints affect ability to absorb the financing? So first, just to kind of put things in context, the World Bank is often present in very difficult contexts, right? We're not present in, high-income countries or places where maybe the private sector will naturally kind of fill gaps or like have investments. So we're very used to contexts where there's a challenge, there's a constraint, there's some low capacity. This is just the nature of the places we work in. In high countries, we tend to work with more knowledge-oriented products, or even things for a fee. So we're used to having these constraints. Some of these constraints that Irina has already mentioned that we're used to experiencing are in terms of language, the familiarity with all of these project procedures, these policies, the compatibility of our policies with the national laws. Sometimes we require like presidential orders just for our projects to go through because there's something about our projects that's not compatible. So we need very specific like legislation just to be passed. So these are things we're very used to, but it does slow down the projects, and it does create these long timelines. Sometimes there's also, gaps in openness and communication, because the contexts we work in are just, fragile contexts. These are poor countries. These are just things that it takes time to build trust and to work around. Another issue is there's, because of the low capacity of countries and perhaps differences in the quality of labor and experience of firms, sometimes you just don't have the local expertise to implement certain projects. The firm selection process can be challenging. There's not a lot of choices in people to implement certain things, so that lack of expert experience are also our challenges. Now, for a lot of these issues, the solution is not really magical or, quick. These are things that just take time, as I said, to, we have a large footprint on the ground, requires a long timeline where we hire local staff. We develop a lot of technical assistance programs. Often for project development, we have a very large upfront process where we develop these project proposals. We are there pretty much helping the government design projects, even though the projects are technically, implemented and carried out by the government. So I think from a workforce perspective, there's two kind of aspects. One is the actual capacity of the government, which we work closely with, and the other is like the workforce capacity of the general population. If there are firms, there are contractors, there are construction workers who need to build a bridge. These are two kind of separate issues on the workforce constraints. Like working with the government is relatively easier because we have that kind of dialogue. It's easy to kind of catch them up. It's easier to have that dialogue. We can move things at like a very high level or talking to the ministers or the president. So I think on that level, that's it's very manageable. The more kind of like wild card is, the general population, right? Like what firms are there? What is the skill set of the workforce, the population? Things like updating the education of a whole generation is like not something you can do overnight. It takes, like 10 years, 20 years to really do that. So I kind of wanted to talk about like what we are seeing in Ukraine, also from our surveys and also from our work in poverty and from the social sectors, because a lot of the changes, context is obviously driving the skills mismatch, right? The skills mismatch is being driven right now because not just from the war, but because the economy has changed. And the economy has changed permanently because of the war, right? We're not going to expect things to go back to the way they were. We're seeing like a very high rise in poverty and inequality and worsening perceptions. And this inequality we're seeing is really driven by the restructuring of the economy, right? There are some very high growth sectors in the economy that has been discussed, like the IT sector, the defense, aerospace, like all of these sectors are actually increasing very fast. And that is why we are seeing this skills mismatch and also the high inequality. Now, this kind of like K-shaped reality is also a concern for recovery, because while there are some sectors that are growing where people are earning higher wages, most people cannot even participate in these sectors, part of because of the education and the lack of, just being ready to participate in these sectors. So the labor market barriers we see, and the groups we see that are least likely to be involved in these sectors are, the women with children, the disabled, the early retirement age. Like, something that we found interesting and a little surprised by is that the female labor force participation has not risen during the war. It was always traditionally very low for whatever cultural reasons or some reasons regarded to perceptions that were discussed earlier. But we thought women would kind of fill in these gaps, right? And we did not see that. I mean, we see it to a little bit, but we don't see it to like the large scale extent that we might have expected. So female labor force participation is still very low and has not increased since pre-war. Alexandra has said that part of this is because of the skills, and it's true that before the war, the women and men were doing very different jobs. Like, they're very segregated, so it is hard to kind of transition into male jobs. But we also see this persistent issue of the care burden. So women with children, it's still these issues are still there, right? They're still kind of there. So and it's also this inequality is very stark, right? For almost half of people in the IT sector are in the top income quintile. So this is what we see from our phone surveys. Now, so the key question here that needs a solution is, some people are not participating in this new economy. And now we talked about the lack of skills, and they're not being ready, and the adult education, and this care burden. So all of that are kind of things that need to be worked around that has no real short-term solution. One thing that we see in other countries, and Michal kind of mentioned this in the case of Serbia or Long's investment, is that the government headhunts and they attract talent back to the country. It's hard to force people back, have people come back to a country, especially poor countries. Because I'm thinking about in East Asia where I've seen this and happen, and the government is actively discussing this. Is Vietnam or other countries, they want to develop their kind of flagship company or some sector they want to be known for globally. They really headhunt people outside and bring them back. In Vietnam, where the average monthly salary is $500 for a manufacturing worker, they're paying $500,000 to these top executives in their domestic firms. So there's no cheap way and there's no quick way to kind of try to develop these economies and try to attract people back. But I think there is still a lot of potential, right? And when we work, we have our prosperity and macro team who works with the government to develop strategies for we call it the economy of the future. I don't know if you've heard of that, right? So yeah, I mean, the economy has permanently changed. There's no going back at this point, right? It's been 5 years. So I think the key here are these high growth sectors, which are very sophisticated, and compared to other countries, I think Ukraine has a huge advantage in terms of experience in certain capacities and certain areas and products. So I think the key are those sectors, and I think there will be a spillover from those sectors into other areas. And I think having that investment and developing more precise education with focus in those sectors are going to be the key. There is a large population that cannot immediately participate in those sectors. That is very true, right? We have the elderly, the women with children, maybe certain regions that relied on agriculture or more the manual manufacturing in the past. Those people will probably need different solutions, right? It's probably going to be more related to social assistance or social protection. There's a lot of people receiving pensions. The population has also shifted quite a bit to a more older population. There are things we don't understand about, the birth rates. I think there's a lot of things related to the population that also needs to be discussed, in terms of developing a more holistic labor market strategy. But I think when we talk about the skills mismatch, the silver lining is that the skills mismatch is because there's such high growth, right? There's actually like really good high growth sectors that want really, educated workers. So I think we talk about the skills mismatch, but it's actually kind of like a good skills mismatch because, that means the economy is moving to a much more developed and more sophisticated area. So, and all the other like positive thing about this sector is that, most of these workers can be remote and digital, right? So there's actually a large, so even if the return migration is going to be not overnight, there's still ways to engage like the diaspora and like getting people involved in the sector and like to benefit the domestic economy. So yes, I think so it's a challenge, but I think there's lots of positive and ways to look at it and to also think about opportunities. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you very much for your opinion. Maybe have question. No, but introduce please in.
You're not asking a question. Hi, my name is Pablo Auxilia. I work for Pearson. That's a fairly large education company. We develop, and my area of expertise is skilling at large scale. In Ukraine today, you have about 6 million migrants that left the country. The difference with a country like Venezuela that has about the same number is that you were a victim of somebody else's ambitions, and it happened in half the time, which is very dramatic. It happened in 4 or 5 years. Venezuela took 10 years to export 6 million people. Why is it so challenging? So we know skills, we have them identified. We know skills gaps and we know skills mismatches. Why is it so difficult to adopt ontologies, structures where we can define and plan how these skills can be applied today and what skills we will need tomorrow? Because that's what we do, and we don't see that happening in the field. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe Alexandra? No? Alexandra?
Okay, thank you very much for the question. Yeah, indeed, according to different estimates, 6 million migrants are somewhere else. But there are actually many more Ukrainians abroad just because, some left during the 30 years of independence. So, many Ukrainians are abroad. But actually, some people have returned, 2 years ago, 1 year ago, and they are returning still. And therefore, I wouldn't say that actually, even during full-scale invasion, some people just return home because it's home. And sometimes it's much better to be at home where you have housing and you have, understand the culture than be somewhere safe abroad. And this is kind of a tricky situation in Ukraine. Actually, when we talk about displacement, then internally displaced, we have more than 4 million internally displaced people. And the situation there is the same. So some people left the country, the towns and cities, but they are still close to the cities. So they are still on the eastern part of Ukraine, even though some businesses relocated to central part and western part of Ukraine. And this is kind of what I'm saying about regional disparities. But for Ukraine, indeed, it's really kind of difficult to adopt the structure. One of the challenges that, if you remember, when the full-scale invasion started in 2022, so everybody was expecting that it will take several weeks, then a year. And then we have IMF forecast for Ukraine, and each year it's next year you will have a peace. And now, when you don't see this kind of war continuing, for many years, you don't actually change the structures. You just think that probably it's short term, and as a result, so our people from army, they will return home, they will take their jobs, and they are not losing their skills so much. Currently, we have different situation, and many people in Ukraine still, already assured that the war is with us for a long time, even though, again, IMF and others, put it as a biggest assumption that we will have peace, soon enough. And therefore, in order to adopt structures, you have to just first understand, like your assumptions and what are the kind of assumptions for your economic development. And then you are studying changing education, you are studying changing curricula, etc. And this is kind of also, like in 2021, we would not think that actually Ukraine will be so strong in meal tech. And actually for drone producers, we are number one now. And before that, we couldn't know, that we will need people actually who can be engineers in this field and who can actually build this. So I wouldn't fully agree that, many jobs that we really need now are remote. That's a problem. That, many jobs that are urgently needed now, it's construction sector, and this is not remote job. It's actually meal tech, and this is not remote job. This is some other things like building physical protection on energy facilities, and this is not remote job. And this is construction, but also it's designers, etc.
And you have to supply all those people. All those people need to eat.
Yes, and then and we have to pay them. And this is another thing that I wanted to say. In order to adopt structures, in order to adopt kind of training, especially for adult training or even for children, we return to the question of financing. So when we talk about vocational education training, what is the biggest challenge there? It's just to have, for example, good equipment that children or adults will be trained for this equipment, to how to work on this, and then they go to business and actually they start working. And currently, and this I know the challenge is not only for Ukraine, but for many emerging countries, we don't have really good equipment in vet schools. And as a result, we can train, humanitarian specialists, etc. But we really lack people, on the ground who work not remotely, but actually with equipment or can produce something. And for this, we already need financing. And in Ukraine, unfortunately, because we had to increase military spending so much. We don't have enough spending for education, for healthcare, etc. We were lucky to have big support of our European countries. We also received support from US, from different IFIs. But again, just therefore, if we talk about Ukrainian budget at the moment, just to give you some understanding, before full-scale invasion, defense and security spending, this is a kind of broad group. We're at 5% of GDP. Currently, it's 30-something% of GDP. So, and this is not substantial for us to win the war. So it's something that keep us going. And the rest part of the budget, like civilian budget, is mostly covered by our international partners. But again, most of the support from international partners comes as loans. And as a result, also what helped Ukraine before full-scale invasion and even during full-scale invasion is that we really had good governance in the country before. We did enormous number of reforms before full-scale invasion. Our debt to GDP ratio was 50%. Now it's 100%. And therefore, this kind of room for this governance actually helped us to remain resilient during the full-scale invasion. But again, this is something that we currently start adopting, that actually we need new structures, and that's where we need active labor market policies. But again, active labor market policies needs financing, and that's where we are kind of stuck a bit, is that we have to prioritize, and priority is number one is army. And then all others, just via financing, a bit here and a bit there. And what was mentioned rightly, we have really big inequality now. And one of the lowest level of wages currently is in the education system, especially in schools. And as a result, if you don't have really good motivated people working in education center, it's also kind of creates problem for education results for children, for other people, and this is kind of another challenge. But again, we cannot solve it really if you don't have enough financing.
Thank you, Alexandra. And I would like to ask all speakers short question. What is the one thing we can do in the next 1 or 2 years? So maybe, Irina, you start.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, from my perspective as a representative of a civil society, I would say please support civil society. And I'd also recommend the World Bank to see the civil society not only as a source of information, but also as an implementer. Because we are working on the ground, we have a lot of expertise, and it can be very useful. Plus, comparing to the national governments, we do not have, political goals. So it's more secure for the World Bank as well to work with us. So, and you as representatives, I guess, from the civil society and from the different organizations, advocate the role of civil society on the national levels, on the local levels. It's very important, like from my experience, what I see on the local level, for the local civil society to grow and become a partner of the municipality, partner of the government, partner of the international partners, and together we actually can do something, and we can solve any problem. Would it be the shortages of incapacity? Would it be any other problems? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alexander.
Okay, I can say one thing that we have to do, but actually when we talk about all of us, the future is peace. So we have to first win the war. And here I just want to say that actually it's not about any peace deal. Russia doesn't want Ukraine to exist. I know that there are so many conflicts around the world that are close to this. So somebody doesn't want somebody to exist. And then you don't really do peace deals. You just have to win the war, and you have to dissolute your enemy, because otherwise there will be constantly the risk. And to win the war, we really need support of all countries. Really all countries of the world. Because we really want everybody just to push the governments, to start helping Ukraine. Because when we see, even voting in the United Nations, we see that many countries still do not vote for Ukraine, but vote together with Russia. And Russia started this war. And actually Russia's idea is that Ukraine shouldn't be there. And therefore, for us, it's the war for existence. It's really, about life or death for Ukraine. And this is something that I want to say. And when we talk about this to win the war and support, it's not only financial, it's not only about military aid, but again, it's about supporting us. For Ukraine, it was really important this year when in the winter we had minus 20 degrees on the streets, and we didn't have any heating and electricity access even in Kyiv, and this is the capital. It's really a difficult situation, and for us it was really important to see that many countries population of countries collected money to purchase us generators. And it was really essential for us that not only governments help us, but actually populations of this country. And this is kind of something that it was really good for us, to understand still that we are not alone. Because sometimes that's I think that this is something that many countries feel this way. I think Syria had the same problem, that nobody really looked at the problem like that. So I would really go to news sometimes and just read them, because it wasn't coming up, easily, the news about Syria when there was so bad war was there. And so for some other countries, I would just go there to read this, because I just have this kind of feel that we have to do it, just to understand what is going on in the world. And also what is important is learn from experience in different countries. All of us have some good experience in one or another area, and that's what we were talking with the World Bank as well, that we don't really have or need to have only knowledge base where we have extensive reports which are difficult to read, but sometimes we really need kind of real particular experience which is easily accessed by any other country in such a context. Like, for example, Ukraine has already so many lessons to be learned by other countries, like resilience of energy sector still, how to build protection over your energy facilities, how to decentralize, how to actually survive during the war, how to still ensure access to education and healthcare, even if it's not excellent, but it's still already there. And I think that we also, as Ukraine, can learn from such experience from other countries, because each of us has something unique. And sometimes they really think that World Bank is, the place where we could get these experiences. But again, not in the form of big reports that we have to read and look for this kind of something special inside, but actually easily access this experience. We have this and this challenge. So what is the good experience saying to us? So we indeed have to learn about each other more. And we just have to really support each other and learn from the experiences. And again, for Ukraine, it's really important just to have the all possible support, diplomatic, wherever, I mean, like financial, from any country, just to win the war.
Thank you, Alexandra. And maybe, Judy, do you have your opinion about this question?
Oh yeah, I have just one note, just because I'm from the poverty sector, and I think it's important to, going forward, is really important to make these policies more informed, based on the actual population, right? Because we've said many times, like there's a lot of like missing information about, what is the population, how many people are there, what are their characteristics. There's no official survey. There's been no census since 2001. Even before the war, there was no census, and there will not be a census until well after the war. So we are working with statistics now to restart official surveys. There's been no survey since 2021. Officially, everything else everything you see from us, the UN, the IOM, etc. Those are all unofficial sources. So I think once we're working with statistics to restart official surveys, and it's really important to use that population information to start informing the policies. Because even we're talking about this labor mismatch, the labor shortage, all of these things are kind of a little bit obscure, right? A lot of this information are from firm surveys of like formally registered businesses, right? It's not all businesses. So I think there's a lot of value in making more like educated and informed policies based on some updated real information on the population, like really how many people are there, how many people are prime age workers, how many elderly are there, like the women, what is the birth rate, like all of these issues or these numbers quite honestly, we don't have like precise numbers on these, right? And that's really important to inform like where things need to be invested, like how much budget should be allocated to different programs, things like that. We still don't have like a good idea on. Of course, there's administrative registries of people, but if you want to have like a holistic strategy for the population and for different support programs, you really need to kind of use more information to make these policies and to have the most impact. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Yes.
So my name is Hazem Rihawi. I'm with the Syria American Council, and thank you so much for mentioning Syria. And one thing that I want to note here, also to answer your question from our experience in Syria and what we went through, and we are going through the same thing. Although different experience, you have a government that is supporting, we were fighting against a regime, so that was, but one thing that we noticed, and it was really a struggle for us, is the obsession of the world with accreditation. That rather than we have skills that are impactful on the ground and people can carry it on, we look at exams and accreditation. So we struggled in northwest of Syria when we were outside of the regime because we didn't have formal universities, yet the demand for health workers, I'm a pharmacist, so we were struggling to find health workers to work in. We have a lot of depletion coming out of it. The end result was all about accreditation. Now after the regime has fell, now we are struggling to have these students who were medical students who left the universities to work in the field, giving them the experience. Like they have a lot of experience. They are excellent surgeons, yet coming back to a system telling them, oh, you need to study such and such. The problem is that obsession with accreditation, we started talking with UNICEF back in 2014, and it was always they talk about emergency and education in emergencies. But what about the adults and going up? They were always omitted. So I think what we need to work, and I support your call for civil society, and this is what we all do, is finding ways for accreditation to be given for the students. And because whatever you will learn, that will be the one that you will use. And after war, hopefully with victory to Ukraine, it will be the same discussion, unfortunately. We've seen that many times. And like you said, we are exchanging experiences. But for me, what I've learned in the past 10 years and what I've worked on it, it's that obsession of accreditation. A pharmacist can be a conduit to healthcare, but we are being kept stuck in our role, and rather than expansion on it for the demand of what these people are needing, we get obsessed, oh, are you allowed to do this or aren't you allowed to do this? So I think one thing that I would advise, at least in our experience, is to push forward on the international community and everyone and especially with Pearson, is that obsession of accreditation. I know that you hold the degrees high, but it's so much in conflict, it becomes whatever skill you have on the ground, this is the one that is useful, and whatever you are able to save lives and help people, this is the one that is useful. And we should find a way to give accreditation for that in any format to allow people to continue. I'm imagining soldiers coming back from the front lines and suddenly in a peaceful time, and I've spent my youth in fighting, and suddenly I'm being turned into another job, and everything will be closed. That's happening, and we are struggling, and we are trying to push. But because of that initial hindrance in the beginning, that everything, unfortunately in this world, it depends on your credit, whether you got it from Harvard or you get it from, it's not useful when you have a Harvard degree, but you cannot apply it on the field. So that's at least my comment.
Yeah, thank you so much, and I agree fully with this. But what I mentioned is this kind of issue that we have to build a system how to recognize informally received qualifications. And actually, as I said, European legislation agrees with this. Allows this. And this is something that I think that all countries can benefit from. We have already opened several qualification centers, for example, even for drone pilots, because you don't have formal education for drone pilots, but we have this qualification center that actually tests your ability, capacities, whether you can be. For healthcare, it's a bit different. Even in European Union, it's regulated profession, and in most of the countries, it's regulated profession. But when really you have kind of this accreditation matters because it is about life of people. But again, as you mentioned, in your case, and the same in Ukraine, we don't have all doctors on the front line who has medical degree. Some of them had just short trainings, and they became really excellent there. But this is, I think, that's something that really, indeed, countries should decide. And if you lack health personnel and you have people with skills, not to have regulated profession for them for at least some years, but then later decide how to deal with this. But again, this kind of qualification centers for recognition of informality, or the formally received skills is really important. For Ukraine, indeed, there is a big discussion about veterans. Because currently, the situation is such that we have veterans on the labor market, mostly, predominantly those who has disabilities, because this is the only possibility actually to leave the army now, because otherwise people are stuck there because of continuous war. And therefore, there is kind of a broad problem that was mentioned, that we actually have this kind of, we don't have many places for people with disabilities because Ukraine is not inclusive. And I think that the same story for your country, yeah. And this is something that, again, we will need financing in order to make sure that jobs are inclusive, or even our health facilities, education facilities are inclusive enough so that people with disabilities can actually enter the buildings and work as teachers or healthcare personnel, etc. And this is kind of where we have this interlinkage between labor market and financing, because sometimes we cannot solve some issues without financing. But at the same time, there are some policies that can help us here how to solve some issues, without much of the financing. But again, yeah, it's kind of the decision will be of our countries in some areas. Because in Ukraine, it will be a bit different because we are heading to European Union, therefore we will have to follow the rules. And for your country, for example, I think that you are more flexible here. But again, it depends on what your government says. But CSOs here play an important role here, just mentioning, tackling the problem and actually showing the examples of other countries as well, because probably your government sometimes doesn't know the practices, and therefore, you just have to show them good example and advise, correctly what to do without even much of the money.
To add and also answer your question, first of all, thank you very much for sharing your experience with us. It was valuable, very much. In Ukraine, I can say that we also have a problem with accreditation. Maybe it's not the same as in Syria, but we also do have it. As a civil society, we see solution to this problem when we are doing, for example, some mentoring or some trainings. We try to do it in connection with educational institution. In this way, when we connect academics, the universities or its vocational institution, with the businesses, with the civil society, with the government. In this way, we're basically giving this accreditation in some way, because the educational institution can then provide the certificate or the diploma, that can be used later on, So at least some basis, for this employee or this specialist, they will have. So hopefully, this practice was actually grow, because right now it's like a pilot for us anyway, and hopefully we'll bring it to the next level and share with like other countries, Syria, and it will bring, results.
Thank you, Irina. We have a few minutes, maybe one short question, if some. Yes, please.
Hi, Leo Bonak from the U.S. Department of Labor. For Judy, I was curious if you had, from the bank perspective, any reflections on what Mikhail said about the role of labor market institutions in raising minimum wage and dealing with the outflows in the Western Balkans and their recovery, and any context you can provide on World Bank policy dialogue and policy advice about Ukraine's ongoing labor law reform and how that might feed into the skilling challenges. Thanks.
Oh, thank you. I'm not from the right sector to answer about the policy dialogue, but yes, there's a large reform policy with the labor code that I'm not in those meetings. But I will talk about the wages. So since 2020, we know prices have doubled since 2020. There's extremely high inflation in Ukraine, probably related to our increase in poverties. And then, we were talking about the labor mismatch, but there's also the labor shortage, right? Those are two kind of different things. And then we do think that the labor shortage, I'm guessing there probably is a higher reservation wage now, partly because of the very high inflation. Things like food, housing, everything has doubled. The electricity tariffs was like about 1.4, at the start of the war. Now it's like 4.3. So, all of these, essentials, household essentials have, increased quite a bit. And I know I know it is hard to hire people right now, partly because of the low wages. So I do believe that the reservation wages are much higher for households. Whether or not, and these policies on minimum wage, that I'm sure that's under discussion with the labor code, but I don't have inside information there.
Yeah, if I may, I will step in here. So in Ukraine, we have a problem also with informal employment. And therefore, we just have to take this into account as well when we talk about Ukraine. And informality takes form of different issues. Sometimes, or most of the companies are registered. So it's not about informality of companies, but this is about informality of employees. So sometimes people are just receiving wages in envelopes, so-called, or in some other ways. Sometimes they do receive minimum wage officially and all over the top, informally, etc. And I wouldn't really, this is something that we just have to bear in mind when we talk about labor market in Ukraine as well. I agree that probably there is a high reservation wage, but at the same time, many people are still trying to find the job, informal or formal. Take into account that social welfare is not really big in Ukraine now, and this is something that we also have to bear in mind. So social protection spending, especially as a share, as it was before in real terms, it declined. What increased is we have assistance to IDPs, internally displaced people, but in order just to provide you figures, it's for adults, each month they receive 2,000 hryvnias, so it's not even $50, and for children a bit more. But again, in order to receive this assistance, you have to either work, or you have to have children up to 14 years, or you have to be registered as unemployed. Unemployment registration is only for 3 months now with the low payments as well, so it's it doesn't really help. And active labor market policies are not active there because there is not enough financing, and that's something that we also have to bear in mind. Therefore, still many people, those people who don't work, sometimes it's women again, because again, they don't have kindergarten or school offline, and they cannot put children there. Sometimes there is for IDPs, and this is again, it's 4 million people. That's a big amount. They move to locations where there is no labor and there is no jobs, and therefore they cannot just work. And that's where we really need to start, like thinking about migration, kind of more migration policies for internally in Ukraine. So the government will actually finance movement of IDPs to those places where companies relocated, because actually indeed we have a big problem with people, like relocated companies, they cannot find right people in the areas they relocated because people were already hired there. And unfortunately, sometimes companies do not have money to relocate individuals, like they actually workers, or sometimes people just don't want to move. Like they want to be at home, and that's what we feel. Like, and they know. Like that. I've never thought about this before full-scale invasion. Like we started thinking about this in 2014 because war is actually from 2014. But like at that time we didn't have so many internal displaced people. Currently we just see this. Like how important it is. Like to have house. How important it is to be at home, to be nearby your relatives, and this is kind of something that actually strikes. Because people are still, like in Kherson, where actually we have routes already covered with drone nets. I don't know whether you have seen this in somewhere in, like in pictures, but it's indeed that many squares and roads are covered with the nets, just to keep up small drones. They do not help from big drones, but they do keep, like people from small ones. And therefore, like this is a kind of a problem that we face, that people do not just want to move even sometimes. We have so-called forced evacuation, when actually people just are taken out, especially with children, from the nearby frontline regions, etc. But when we talk about policies, indeed, we do have a new draft labor code in the parliament, because the previous one was from 1971. It was amended for several times, but it was really rigid. So currently, in order to favor the business, in order to ease the situation on labor market, it will be more flexible. It has still some possibilities for protection, like of the rights of employees, but it's more really flexible. According to the labor code, like because we're heading to the European Union, there is an idea to increase minimum wage to 40% of average wage, because it's much smaller. But probably it will be done gradually. Why? Because minimum wage doesn't only impact businesses like private businesses, but again, it impacts a lot public sector, education, healthcare, etc. And as I said before, like we don't really have money to pay much higher wages in these sectors. Or we have to optimize more the structures, especially like when we talk about healthcare, education, but it's really difficult to do, because when we talk about healthcare, we have smaller number of population, but at the same time, we have more treatments done because, for example, of injuries. If a person is injured on the front line, sometimes it goes through 5 different surgeries, or and then rehabilitation, and actually it requires more costs like for healthcare as well. Just some numbers. Before full-scale invasion, in Kharkiv Oblast, this is one of the oblasts, like frontline oblasts, we had, I think, 74,000 people with cancer. Now we have much smaller number of population in the oblast, but the number of people with cancer increased. And this is another challenge that we will face as well. And this will actually also relate to our labor market situation in the future. Unfortunately, people do not really care about the health when there is a war. And therefore, we will have acute cases of cancer and some other diseases as well. And we already see this. And as a result, expenditures for healthcare will increase. But at the same time, again, we don't have money, like to increase minimum wages for the sector. Because also what we want to avoid with the minimum wage is that if we increase sharply minimum wage, then we cannot hold with the differentiation between different people like working in the sector, and therefore we demotivate those who are skilled, for example, in healthcare or education, etc., to work in the sector, and they can easily find jobs sometimes in private sector, and therefore we just should avoid this. We have finally approved the law on vet education, and therefore like this will be building the structure of vet education for adults. But again, here we need money like to finance those. Unemployment insurance, as I said, is there, but it was restricted during full-scale invasion just because, again, to save some money like for these people. and as a result, it's not there. But again, some people cannot work, and especially women, just because they have to take care of children. And also, we do have problem with care services in Ukraine. And therefore, sometimes women are those who are paying, who is actually providing care to sick relatives or elderly people. And currently, more and more for those veterans that are coming back from the front line with the big injuries. So I mean, like they have to take care of them as well, because again, the government doesn't allocate enough money for care service. And therefore, this restricts also the number of people, I mean, like at the labor market. At the same time, the government started the policies on care service involving civil society organizations, actually. So there will be some procurements of services from civil society organizations to provide care. It will not be health care, but it's kind of more like really care service. So I mean, like lots of things are going on, but again, I mean, like we will have to see, I mean, like how it will impact. Minimum wage discussion is there, but again, I mean, like some companies do not want it to increase as well. Just I mean, like just because for them it's high costs. And trade unions in Ukraine are quite weak. We don't have kind of such trade unions as Lufthansa, which stops just flying out when spring meetings are there. So it's like, so trade unions are not strong there. Therefore, the discussion is going on, but it's kind of, we will see how it goes. But again, as it was mentioned, poverty is increasing. But for me, minimum wage is not a tool for poverty, I mean, like fight. It's a labor market tool. When we talk about poverty, then we really indeed have to talk about means-tested welfare system, etc. And that's what government will try to do. But currently, again, I mean, like it's really small. I mean, like all money are paying there in the system per family or per individual. But when we have, I mean, like big poverty, I mean, like it means that in the total amounts, this is a significant amount.
Thank you, Alexandra, for your answer. And we don't have more time for this discussion, but I would say thank you all our speaker and all participants and for this discussion, great discussion, and our event is closed. Thank you very much.
Recording stopped.
It was a pleasure. And if you want to take a picture of this, we can remain in touch. You guys are catalysts.